700 years after the days of Elijah and Elisha, the Chariot of Fire became an anthem of slavery in the United States. Undiminished in those nearly 3,000 years, Elijah's chariot still burned in the hearts of the Southern slaves as the promise of freedom and salvation. In the early 1830s, an old man and his wife, slaves of an Irish Choctaw owner, journeyed down the Trail of Tears to the Red River Valley of Oklahoma from Mississippi. The Choctaw were the first nation of the 5 tribes of the Deep South to be removed, as it was said, as if they were rodents or garbage, from their homelands to Oklahoma when the Indian Removal Act was passed by Andrew Jackson. The Choctaw and their households and their slaves, unsurprisingly, didn't do well on the Trail of Tears. 15,000 Choctaw and 1,000 slaves died in the winter blizzard of 1830, and 2,500 died from cholera in 1832. But this old slave, Wallace Willis, and his wife made it to Oklahoma, and with them, they brought their songs and hymns. Mr. Willis said that he composed the words to "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot" while he watched the Red River in the evening, because it reminded him of what he had heard about the Jordan River, that when you go over the Jordan River, you arrive in the promised land. But he sang about the chariot of fire because that fiery chariot of Elijah was the message, or as Father Robert would say today, the Valentine of God. That God was breaking into the world to do something unprecedented. We will hear the beautiful words of "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot" in a few minutes. We will hear the wistful yearning to be taken home, to be taken by angels to the place where all the loved ones are, carried to a place of rest and peace. But it's not just the desire for peace in the afterlife, but to be free here and now in the place where they live, to be where they are seen as people, not chattel, as free citizens with the rights and privileges of citizens. "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot" recalls chariots of fire and horses which took Elijah away, not to death, but to places beyond our reckoning for God's new purposes. Elisha, whom Elijah transfers his huge prophetic capacity and power, is skeptical that he can carry on without the mentor. He begs him for a double measure of his spirit to help him. He watches while Elijah is borne away in the chariot of fire and horses by a whirlwind, which signals to Elisha and to people forevermore that God has done something completely unpredicted. Elijah has been saved from death for another purpose. But we do understand that Elisha is the successor, the one whom God has chosen to make new things. And Elisha goes on to work amazing and liberating miracles. He raises a child from the dead. He cures a king of leprosy. He feeds 100 people with 20 loaves, and he turns away the entire Syrian army without bloodshed. Elisha works in a really specific way. He helps people who take a chance on believing in his connection with God. And I think the best illustration of this is the story of the woman whose creditor was about to take both her children into slavery as payment of her debt. She comes to Elisha and begs for help, understanding that he has within him the Spirit of God, the spirit of all possibility in deep measure. Elisha tells her to borrow all the containers she possibly can from her neighbors and pour oil in all those containers until she can pour no more. And she does. And the oil never runs dry. She then sells the oil, pays her debt, and keeps her children. Elisha is moved by her need and works with her to find the resources she needs in her neighborhood away from the oppression of her governing regime, who would treat her children as commodities. Her government couldn't solve the problem because it didn't see her poverty, which was the poverty of all people in those days after 3 years of famine, as a problem to solve. But Elisha has a better way because he is working in God's economy, which knows no poverty. So that when Jesus comes to the mountain with Peter, James, and John, who are amazed but bewildered to see Elijah and Moses, the way has been prepared for those fishermen to understand the transfiguration as the transfer of power from God to the one who needs no chariot, but brings the freedom of love. Elijah is there again, as prophesied. This must mean that this is an important new development in the history of the world. And the event has all the pomp and circumstance it should have. But the message, as Jesus later says, can't be clear until after the resurrection. But my friends, even then and even now, we struggle to see that love is what defeats everything else. It seems to me that it is powerful testimony that despite the evidence that human dignity, human compassion, human respect were entirely lacking in their lives, the slaves believe that there is a God who stands for everyone, whose economy knows no poverty, and whose justice rolls down like water. They sang those beautiful songs to sustain and nourish their community through decade after decade after decade of misery and mistreatment. And for me, that is a source of constant amazement. And for me, that is another chariot of fire. Our presiding bishop, Michael Curry, recently said that he thought that change needs to start with everyone finding someone very different from him or her or them and getting to know that person, getting to see what that person is about and what was important to him or her or them. And Bishop Curry's words then reminded me of Elisha, whose solutions were always personal and always full of love. We believe in a God who is both inscrutable and intimate, completely other than we are, but completely involved in everything about us, from the finite to the cosmic. The story of Elijah and Elisha is the story of a God who is willing to fill human beings with the spirit of all possibility, so that they make what seems impossible not only possible, but wonderful and actual. Wallace Willis made songs which captured this spirit of all possibility, this radical hope for newness, and made it the anthem for countless numbers of people 3,000 years after Elijah's whirlwind. And if that is not a Valentine, I don't know what is. May the spirit of love and all possibility be with you all today and every day.